Book 1, The Family, Section 14 of The Professor's House by Willa Cather. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Book 1, The Family, Section 14. At the end of the semester, St. Peter went to Chicago with Rosamond to help her buy things for her country house. He had very much wanted to stay at home and rest. The university work seemed to take it out of him that winter more than ever before, but Rosamond had set her mind on his going, and Mrs. St. Peter told him he couldn't refuse. A Chicago merchant had brought over a lot of old Spanish furniture, and on this nobody's judgment would be better than St. Peter's. He was supposed to know a good deal about rugs, too. When his wife said a thing must be done, the professor usually did it from long-established habit. Her instincts about what one owed to other people were better than his. Louis accompanied them to Chicago, where he was to join his brother, the one who was in the silk trade in China, and go on to New York with him for a family reunion. St. Peter was amused and pleased to see that Louis sincerely hated to leave them. With very little encouragement, he would have sent his brother on alone and remained in Chicago with his wife and father-in-law. They all lunched together, after which the professor and Rosamond took the Marcellus brothers to the LaSalle Street station. When Louis had again and again kissed his hand to them from the rear platform of the 20th Century observation car, and was rolled away in the very act of shouting something to his wife, St. Peter, who had so often complained that there was too much Louis in his life, now felt a sudden drop, a distinct sense of loss. He took Rosamond's arm, and they turned away from the shining rails. "We must be diligent, Rosie. He expects wonders of us." Scott McGregor got on the Bluebird Express one afternoon, returning from a business trip for his paper. On entering the smoking car, he came upon his father-in-law lying back in a leather chair, his clothes covered with dust, his eyes closed, a dead cigar hanging between the relaxed fingers of his dark, muscular hand. It gave Scott a start. He thought the professor didn't look well. "Hello, Doctor. What are you doing here?" "Oh, yes, the shopping expedition. Where's Rosamond?" "In Chicago, at the Blackstone." "Outlasted you, did she?" "That's it." The professor smiled apologetically, as if he were ashamed to admit it. Scott sat down beside him and tried to interest him in one subject after another without success. It occurred to him that he had never before seen the professor when he seemed absolutely flattened out and listless. That was a bad sign. He was glad they were only half an hour from Hamilton. "The old chap needs rest," he reflected. "Rosamond's run him to death in Chicago. He oughtn't to be used as a courier, anyhow. I'm going to tell Kitty that we must look out for her father a little. The Marcelluses have no mercy, and Lillian has always taken it for granted that he was as strong as 3 men. That evening, Mrs. St. Peter was standing by the French windows in the drawing-room, watching somewhat anxiously for her husband. The Chicago train was usually punctual, and surely he would have taken a cab from the station, for it was a raw February night with a freezing wind blowing off the lake. St. Peter arrived on foot, however. As he came through the gate, she could see by his walk and the set of his shoulders that he was very tired. She hurried to open the front door and asked him why he hadn't come up in a taxi. "Didn't think of it, really. I'm a creature of habit, and that's one of the things I never used to do." "And in your lightest overcoat. I thought you only wore this one because you were going to buy a new fur coat in Chicago." "Well, I didn't," he said rather shortly. "Let's omit the verb to buy in all forms for a time. Keep dinner back a little, will you, Lillian? I want to take a warm bath and dress. I did get rather chilled coming up." Mrs. St. Peter went to the kitchen, and after a discreet interval, followed her husband upstairs and into his room. "I know you're tired, but tell me one thing. Did you find the painted Spanish bedroom set? Oh, dear, yes, several of them. And were they pretty? Very. At least, I think I'd found them so if I'd come upon them without so many other things. Too much is certainly worse than too little of anything. It turned out to be rather an orgy of acquisition. Rosamond lost her head? Oh, no, perfectly cool. I should say she had a faultless purchasing manner. Wonder where a girl who grew up in that old house of ours ever got it. She was like Napoleon looting the Italian palaces. Don't be harsh. You had a nice little vacation at any rate. A very expensive one for a poor professor, and not much rest. A look of sharp anxiety came into Mrs. St. Peter's face. You mean, she breathed in a hushed voice, that she let you... He cut in sharply. I mean that I paid my way, as I hope always to be able to do. Any suggestion to the contrary may have been very graceful, but it would have been rejected. I am quite ready to permit myself a little extravagance to be of service to the women of my family. Any other arrangement is humiliating. Then that was why you didn't get your fur coat? That may have been one reason. I was not much in the humor for it. Mrs. St. Peter went swiftly downstairs to make him a cocktail. She sensed an unusual weariness in him, and felt, as it were, the bitter taste on his tongue. A man, she knew, could get from his daughter a peculiar kind of hurt, one of the cruelest that flesh is heir to. Her heart ached for Godfrey. When the professor had been warmed and comforted by a good dinner, he lit a cigar and sat down before the hearth to read. After a while his wife saw that the book had slid to his knees, and he was looking into the fire. Studying his dark profile, she noticed that the corners of his funny eyebrows rose, as if he were amused by something. "What are you thinking about, Godfrey?" she said presently. "Just then you were smiling quite agreeably." "I was thinking," he answered absently, "about Euripides. How when he was an old man he went and lived in a cave by the sea, and it was thought queer at the time. It seems that houses had become insupportable to him. I wonder whether it was because he had observed women so closely all his life." End of Book 1, The Family, Section 14.